Welcome to Napa Valley Inside Out. I'm Latife Hayson, and I am delighted to be hosting this podcast, shining a light on one of the most beautiful and coveted lifestyles in the world. If you're interested in developing a property, planting a vegetable garden, making olive oil, fashion, architecture, interior design, county rules and regulations, biking paths, art, getting into the wine business, farming practices, the tax benefits of owning a vineyard, or the ultimate private tours and tastings, and all the fabulous annual cultural events we enjoy here, and so much more, then you won't want to miss this show. Every week I will be interviewing amazing talent, vintners, entrepreneurs, leaders, consultants, event planners, and more. They will share their knowledge, experience, advice, goals, passions, and their best kept secrets. Hello everybody, today we have Andre Beckstoffer in the house. Andy is the owner of Beckstoffer Vineyards in Napa, Mendocino, and Lake counties, and the owner of some of Napa Valley's most historic vineyard properties. He is the largest non-winery owner in Napa Valley and the North Coast, and he provides grapes to over 150 wineries. So welcome and thank you so much for being here. It's a great honor.
Thank you for having me. Be nice.
Thank you. Tell us the road to Napa Valley. You have a degree in engineering and an MBA, and you came here in 1969?
Yes, I did. I came in 69 working for a corporation, and I was in the business of buying companies for that corporation. And we had bought a company that owned Italian Swiss Colony, which many people don't know today, but in those days it was as big as Gallo. And in addition, we bought Inglenook and we bought Beaulieu. So I came out to be part of those organizations. And in those days, they didn't have enough grapes, for example, for the Inglenook and Beaulieu properties. So I was asked to go around the country and see if I could get people to invest in real estate, in vineyards. The corporation didn't want to do that themselves because they wanted to put their money in marketing and manufacturing. And they had old wine plants. So I could convince people to invest in vineyards, explain to them the economics of prime varietal vineyards. But they always said, well, we'll invest, but who's going to farm? So we tried to put some other people in the farming business here, and we could find people who could farm 30 acres the old way. But we had ideas, not knowing much, we didn't know, but we thought that we wanted people to farm 100 acres the new way. So we ended up forming a farming company of our own to farm, and we ended up getting additional vineyards. For example, in 1970, we were farming over 3,000 acres in Napa Valley, which was about 12% of the whole valley, in addition to the land with Beaulieu and Inglenook. That was the total. So that's how I got here, and then I formed that company in 1973. I bought that company from them with a small amount of vineyards, small amount here, more in Mendocino County. And so I did what they say, I bought the farm.
So what year was that?
In 1973.
So that's when you really went out on your own?
That's when I went on my own, 1973, yes.
And what was the valley like back in those days?
Well, it's easy to say it was not wine country. It wasn't Modesto either, but it wasn't wine country. It was 60 miles from San Francisco. We used to have a mantra back in those days because we were all wanting to preserve agriculture. We said, never let the sun set on the tourist. You come up and let them taste wine, but give them nowhere to eat and nowhere to sleep, so they'll leave before nightfall and won't screw up the agriculture. But that's what it was like. But remember, there were less than 50 wineries then. There were six major only six wineries of any real importance, which were Inglenook and Beaulieu, Louis Martini, Charles Krug, Beringers, and Christian Brothers. Robert Mondavi had just started 3 years before, so he hadn't had that presence, if you would, in those days. And then it began to roll in terms of vineyard development and vineyard technology and winery development.
So it's really interesting that back in those days you were already not wanting to have tourists come up here and ruin the agricultural zoning and environment.
We've been concerned about agriculture forever here, and with the ag preserve, we had something different to lean on, if you would, to preserve agriculture.
So tell me, we are celebrating our 50th anniversary for the Ag Preserve.
Yes.
Tell me how that came about and why. What was the thought process behind that, and who was behind it?
Well, that really happened because of the people in the city, not the business itself. I can't tell you, Dewey Anderson, and there was a group in the city that had seen what was going on. I guess there was something happening in Petaluma. They were seeing what was happening down in down in Carmel, I guess. Right. And so they decided to do an ag preserve, to put an ag preserve. But let me say to you that, today there are lots of people who were there and participated, if you would. But many of them were brand new to the business and new here and young, like all of us. But the two people in the business who really contributed were one, Andre Tchelistcheff, who was a longtime planning commissioner, an important guy, and he was a farmer, owns a lot of land in Yountville, and Louis Martini. And Louis had statue in those days, and the rest of them didn't. But they wanted to protect the land. But again, it was mainly the supervisors from the city and not from the Upper Valley. But they had an idea that they didn't want this to be caramelized, that's what they said, like Carmel.
Yeah.
That was the deal, yeah.
That was the best thing that ever happened to us, really.
It was. It's extremely important to us. And it's important today, and it was important then for lots of reasons. But back in the 1970s and the 1980s, and we can go into this with my businesses, you really couldn't make money growing grapes. Right. The only thing you could do was own the land and hope for capital appreciation. And in those days, and I was on the Napa County Planning Commission from 1975 to 1981, so we saw lots of things coming through. Now, there wasn't the pressure that we have today for event centers and things, but there was pressure to do things. But if it hadn't been for the Ag Preserve, vineyards didn't make money, that there would have been a lot of development up here. It's sort of in a beautiful place like this. The American way is this would be estate homes and destination resorts and things of that sort. The Ag Preserve protected us from that in the 70s and 80s when it didn't make sense, economic sense to grow grapes. Today it makes economic sense to grow grapes, so we have different protections. But that was extremely important then, as it is today, in limiting the kind of development that happens here.
How do you think we're doing with the Ag Preserve? Have we been executing on it the way it was intended?
Yes and no. There's trouble in paradise, but it's still paradise.
Yeah.
But there's so much development happening in the unincorporated areas that, you live here, you see what the traffic is like.
Oh, it's unbelievable.
And you see what's happening in terms of the event center development, however you want to define that. And so that's trouble. That's trouble for us here. To be a prime viticultural area in this world, we can't be a resort area, a recreation. We have to be an agricultural area. So that culture, that whole process has to maintain. But if you come up today thinking you come to an agricultural area, you get tied up in a big traffic jam. Then you go to a tasting room and you stand in line to pay $90 to be hosted by a hospitality professional. And you think what you're going to do is come up with this beautiful bucolic ride. Then you're going to go to a winery and be hosted by the winemaker or the owner, and he's going to share his passion with you. Well, you got to make sure we don't lose that. We got to make sure we don't lose that, and the people who have to protect us about that is the supervisor, the government. And I'm not sure that they're doing the best job they can. Right.
But do you have any ideas about how to deal with the traffic? I just don't know how they possibly can do anything about it. We have these two main arteries. There are no stop sign, there are no lights between Yountville and St. Helena. You can't get out of the side streets. The traffic is awful. It's not a good experience for a lot of people coming.
Yes.
But I don't know what the alternatives are. There's nothing in the works. There's no underpasses, underground. There's nothing.
No,
roundabouts.
No, there's not, and I don't know the answer either. But one of the things that's happening now and has not happened in the 50 years I've been here is that the city of Napa and the people of the city of Napa really never wanted much to do with the wine business. And the people up valley we never went down to eat or anything like in the city of Napa. what's happening now is the city of Napa is taking a major piece of the wine hospitality job to themselves.
Yes.
And that will stop some of the traffic to come up. And for them to be successful, people have to eat, sleep, stop, and shop in the city of Napa. And I think what's going on there will attract a lot of them to do that. And then they can figure out how to get up to the up valley and back, hopefully in an economic and efficient way. Mm-hmm. But I don't have the solution for the traffic problem. I don't think anybody has the solution to the traffic problem. But hopefully we won't make it worse. That's one of the things we want to really
What do you think about roundabouts?
Well, I've seen roundabouts in Europe. I've seen roundabouts a lot of places. And Americans don't seem to understand what they're about.
They're great. We have them in Australia. They're everywhere. They're fantastic.
We tried to put one in Rutherford.
Yes, I remember.
And we found out we had too much space and things of that sort. Yeah. And I think people would learn what they're like. But right now, I think people don't know. I think the city of Napa is going to put some roundabouts in. So maybe they have them in Vail, and they work great.
They're fantastic. They do take up a lot of space, but they're really fantastic for flow.
They are.
What was your experience on the Planning Commission like?
It was interesting. I was young and early in those days, and I went on the Planning Commission, and I went on a bank board. I wanted to find out how government worked. I wanted to find out banks lent money, right? Yeah. What did they think about? But it was a great experience. I learned a couple of things on the Planning Commission. I understand one that government employees are not dumb. No. You know, they're not smart. But they have a problem in that they think government has the best solution for everything. Mm-hmm. And that was a problem for me as we went through. But I met a lot of people, a lot of very good people. I think we were putting, and it changes. I was there when the Ag Preserve was under assault by people wanting to do different things. We increased, when I was on the Planning Commission, we increased the amount of acreage that was in the Ag Preserve and in the Ag Watershed. And it was contentious. You know, you heard about the contentiousness during the Ag Preserve itself, but I remember we were up in Po Valley, and we were having hearings about expanding, and Jim Hickey, who was the planning director, said to me, "Andy, take your break, but don't go outside." Oh. So it was contentious, but we developed a lot. We put in a small winery ordinance to help. In those days, you wanted to get more wineries started. Yeah. So it was a good experience. I'm glad I did it. I don't want to do it for too long, but I think everybody should participate in government at some point. You learn how it works. Right.
Well, you were doing that in addition to running your business.
Oh, yeah.
Tell me about the Winery Definition Ordinance. Were you involved in helping draft that?
Yes, I was. Remember, the Ag Preserve itself said you're allowed to have one winery and one home per every 40 acres, or in the Ag Watershed every 160 acres. But nobody knew quite what a winery was. So it actually started about 1985, Jim Hickey, the then planning director, said, we need to define what a winery is. And so that's how we got involved. And so I was working as the president of the Napa Valley Grape Growers Association at that time, and took a lead in doing it. And one of the major things about that was that we were saying a Napa Valley winery has to make Napa Valley wine. A Napa Valley winery can't predominantly make Monterey wine. Right. I can remember saying that Monterey Vineyards will do as much to help preserve agriculture in Napa as oranges from Florida will. Right. Selling orange juice here. Right. And so that's when we developed the 75% rule, because it was a federal requirement that for wine to come from any particular appellation, it had to be 75% grown in that appellation. We also said that wineries were production plants, and anything else, hospitality, food service, had to be ancillary or secondary to that. So we could control that development, if you would. And that was the major things about the Winery Definition Ordinance. And, you know, it was a hard time. It was a really hard time, but we got it done.
And is a part of that a winery has to be a minimum of 10 acres to apply for a winery? That's part of the winery definition.
Yes, and remember, we went from 1 acre to 10 acres. Now, if you ask me about where we could go from here in terms of controlling some of this growth, it's now 10 acres, and the 10 acres was picked because you could put a winery and you could be self-sustained on 10 acres, enough and grow enough grapes on that acreage to protect wine. That's no longer the case. Now you have a situation where you get wineries on 10 acres, but they're too big, so you get all sorts of variances from setbacks, and everybody fights about all that.
Yeah.
I would like to see the minimum acreage for a winery go to 40 acres, just like it is for any other parcel here. And then you'd be able to grow enough grapes on it. You wouldn't need these variances. We would eliminate so many fights. Combination of the 75% rule and a 40-acre minimum for winery would solve so many problems, in my view, here in Napa County. But that's when it happened.
Well, that discussion came up, I think, 40 acres maybe 2 years ago. And what happened with that?
It's like so many things around here, they don't want to talk about it, so they push it aside somewhere. But it needs to come back. It needs to come back. And rather than all of this variances, for example, we need to get rid of that, and we need to have these wineries to be self-sustaining. Now, you probably need to have some sort of exemptions for people who have been here forever, have 10 acres, some sort of ownership requirement, or maybe some requirement that you have to live on it. If you live on the property, you're not going to let people raise too much hell there, right?
Right, I agree.
And those kind of things could be put into this for properties less than 10 acres for people who have been here for a long time.
Right, yeah. Let's talk about Measure C. It's a pretty heated debate.
Yes.
Could you give us an unbiased opinion, or an unbiased view of both sides of the debate?
Sure, but some people might think it's not unbiased.
I know, you've got to think unbiased, and then I'm going to ask you what you're planning to, how you're planning to vote and why.
Well, the thing is, I was not involved. I am involved with this now. I was not involved with this when they did this in 2016. They put forth an ordinance in 2016. Just the environmentalists put it together, and they found a flaw in it, so it did not come to the vote of the people, but a lot of people were for it. Then in August, and I didn't get involved because I didn't think there was enough filters in this. It was strictly an environmental thing and I can't get too much involved in all the details of those things, but I just didn't see enough filters. Enough people hadn't been involved. In August of this year, I got a call from the Napa Valley Vintners Association, not from the environmentalists, who said to me, we have been working with the environmentalists. We have our lawyer, Tom Adams of DPF, which is the development here, working with the environmentalist lawyer, and we've come up with a collaboration and an initiative, and we'd like your support. And I said, I want to support that. To get the vintners and the environmentalists on the same page, using their lawyer and environmentalist lawyer to put that together. I said, now we've got all the filters, and let's do that. So I started out to support that, and I wrote a letter to the editor back there saying, congratulations to the Vintners Association for starting the conversation. Well, at that point, people began to object. The grape growers objected and the Farm Bureau objected because they said, we have not been involved in the process. And then another whole group from the vintners objected because they said we haven't been in the process. Plus they said, we don't like the initiative system in the state of California. We don't like this, putting laws through with the initiative system not going through the regular legislative process. Well, the initiative system started in the state of California because people couldn't get any laws through the state legislature. And so that's been true there. People will tell you that's been true here. People will give you a long list of attempts to do something that's good for the environment here. So the major objections were process, and they were the initiative initially. And you said there's conflict here. And I think that's a damn shame. And what I say to you, and I'm going to say to you this, I think we're into this conflict because of lack of leadership by the Board of Supervisors. In 2016, I don't know whether it would have passed or not, but certainly there was enough people so concerned that the Board of Supervisors should have at that point started to do some sort of ordinance, heard hearings, and passed an ordinance. And that way we get rid of the process problem and we get rid of the initiative problem. Well, but once they're there. And then the opponents began to say everything in the world. I mean, this is about saving some old woodlands, and they're saying it's going to raise taxes and raise. increased, and that's not real. But it's just a shame we're here.
So a lot of our viewers from around the country and maybe around the world don't know what Measure C is. So can you tell them what it is?
Measure C puts a restriction on cutting down oak trees in the ag watershed. And they do that to preserve the watershed itself.
And the ag watershed is in the hillsides.
Is in the hillsides.
Yeah.
And let me explain to you the nexus between an oak tree and the water supply. An oak tree with its spread stops the hard pounding of the water, thus eliminating the water from sheeting off and soil erosion too.
Right.
So it then goes into the leaf structure, it then goes into the ground, and then from the ground it slowly seeps into the aquifers. 70% of the water in the wells in Napa County comes from the watershed of Napa County. So what we're talking about is all the wells in Napa County, and this is our snowpack, if you would. This is where we get our water from. We're trying to protect that watershed. So what this Measure C says, that after you cut down 14% of the available land, which has already been cut down, which is 795 acres, after that, after you cut down that much acreage in oak trees, you have to get a permit, and you can't get a permit to do vineyards. But they also say that in addition to the oak woodlands, there's over 5,000 acres of conifers, if you would, that could be used. So it isn't stopping vineyards, it's just stopping in certain places, and it sets some setbacks from streams. So you cut down erosion and things of that sort. But it is an environmental issue.
So the setbacks are what, 25 to 100?
They vary on the class of stream.
Right.
And these things, if someone were here to explain to you, you would see that these things are reasonable in terms of the other conservation regs that are already in existence in Napa County. But it does add another restriction. And people object, saying that Napa County has more restrictions than anybody else already. Yes. But remember, there's no other agricultural area that is as prime for agriculture and is beautiful and is subject to as much urban and commercial pressure as the Napa Valley.
Yeah, that's a good
So
point.
so it has to have more restrictions than other places. I wish there were no restrictions too, but we see what happens when there's no restrictions.
Yeah. And so the Napa County, the Napa Vintners Association, I think most members are voting no on Measure C. Is that correct?
I'm not a member of the Napa Valley Vintners Association, but let me say to you, when they came out against it, they said, one, it was poorly written, and there were some ambiguities there, and three, the majority of the people who called in objected to it. So, first of all, their lawyer wrote it. And so now they're saying there's legal problems with it. So, and he hadn't surfaced. Where he is, I'm not sure, but me. And then they said, the majority. I'm a member of the Grape Growers Association and the Farm Bureau. I was a founder of the Grape Growers Association, president, very involved in all that stuff. Let me say to you that I got no survey to ask me as a member of either of those organizations how I felt about it. So they did no formal surveys. But I also say to you that because of my involvement, I talk to lots of growers. And I have to say the majority of the people I talk to are in favor of it.
Oh.
So let's have a vote, in other words. So, but I don't think, it breaks my heart that people like the Grape Growers Association are opposed to this environmentally sensitive thing. And I think it started that process, and now they've got all sorts of reasons that make sense to me and don't.
Let's move on to the movie Andre.
All right.
So, did you see the
Yes,
movie
I did.
Andre?
Yes, I did.
Yeah, The
Yeah.
Voice of Wine.
A Voice of Wine.
So, tell us about it. I wasn't here. I was in Austin and I missed it. So, tell us about the movie.
It's
10
really
years in the
great,
making.
It's a great tribute to Andre, done by his great cousin or something, Mark Tchelistcheff, nephew. And it's just great that it happened. I mean, it's nice to see those things back with Andre and his contribution to this place. You know, in the 1970s into the late 1970s, the icon that really represented the Napa Valley was a production man, a winemaker. Then you got Andre Tchelistcheff. And then sometime late 70s, early 80s, that shifted to a marketing man, Robert Mondavi. And the world was never the same again. But Andre left Beaulieu and basically left the valley for lots of reasons we can talk about. And so that production icon didn't join with that marketing icon and provide more balance. Now, love Bob Mondavi. He did a great job. But I think it's just a shame that Andre didn't stay and that we weren't represented on both sides of that equation. Now, there's some controversy in this thing, in this movie, because when the corporation came, Hubline, as I said, we bought more vineyards, and so we got 1,000 more acres, and Andre had 600 or 700, and Inglenook had some. And we had to farm all of it. And the crowning thing was that we also were forced to sign a contract with the United Farm Workers and Cesar Chavez. And neither Andre or many of the old people would have nothing to do with that. So my company took over the farming of all the Beaulieu properties and everything else. And Andre didn't like that. He didn't like that BB was sold, but as the film shows, the Madame wouldn't put any money, the Madame Dupin, who owned it, wouldn't put any money in it. And then with all of these vineyards, we now have 3,000 acres, and we have United Farm Workers, and it just couldn't happen that Andre would do it. But he didn't like it, and no question he didn't like it. But what we did, we said, look, we're going to bring in a bright young viticulturist named Bob Steinhauer, who stayed with us for a long time, went on to manage all of the treasury vineyards all over the world. Big guy, a young guy, and we're going to put him with Andre. And Andre's knowledge of the Napa Valley long term, with Bob's new science, we put those two together, and that's going to be our team to farm the vineyards. And it worked beautifully. I mean, Andre and Bobby got to be fast friends. Right. And that they made a major contribution because there was a lot of vineyard technical development happening in those days. And Andre got to participate in that. But the film says that Andre left the vineyards and never came back. It's a shame because he made a contribution not only in the winemaking area, but also in the vineyard area, and they should have shown that.
And you also ended up good friends with him, too.
Oh, yeah. He, everybody from back those days has Andre stories. Yeah. And they're fun Andre stories.
I heard he had an open door. I think Tor Kenwood said that. He was just a genius, and he had an open door. And anybody who wanted to get advice from him, his door was always open. Yeah.
Well, yeah, and the thing is that, you know, I can remember fighting the frost with Andre in 1970, riding around in his truck. It's colder than the devil. And so in that truck, and I'd turn on the heater in his truck, and then I'd look away and he'd turn it off. and so we went back and forth, and then finally he said, Andy, you know, the thermometer is right above my windshield, and if you turn the heat on here, we can't take. And then we would go back to this little shack, and everybody was out checking things. This is 1970. And we would come in and say, at BB3, we've got a 32, and somebody said at BB1, we've got a 36. And so then you could light, there wasn't much water frost protection then. So you could light a pot, or you could light every other pot or every other row, and then in each pot there was like 5 holes, and you could do the intensity from 1 to 5. And so for me, I said, well, let's just turn them all on. Why not? Go home, go to bed. And he said, well, if you do that, we can't get any oil delivery for tomorrow morning. We'll be out. So it was really man against nature. Riding around with Andre was just, and Dorothy would fix me a sandwich, you know, and it was just fun. And then watching Bob and Andre talk viticulture was amazing.
Oh, so many
just
great
amazing,
times.
Yeah.
Let me ask you, back in those days, did you have, were the Mexicans doing the farming?
Yes.
Interesting.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and you trained them, obviously, they didn't learn in Mexico?
Oh, no, they would learn here. They would come in, and there was a cadre here that had farmed before, but they came in, and we did lots of training programs, right? And in those days, we would have individual guys come in, and we would put them into crews, and we would train those crews, and we would put supervisors with them, and they would learn. Yeah, today you don't do that. You get farm labor contractors, and most of them come from outside the county. When you crew up for either pruning or picking, we have in Napa, we have a crew of 20-some guys who do lots of the work, who live here. But when pruning, you might need 80 to 100 guys. And picking, you might 80 to 100 guys. And then they come from out of county. But they're all Mexican. They're all Mexican and mainly from Michoacan.
What about smudge pots? Do you still use them?
No.
But they're still out there. Do some people use them?
Some people use them a little bit, but they are return stack heaters, not smudge pots, and they are environmentally acceptable, but they don't do as good a job as water. So if you have water, the crop is so valuable that you will use overhead sprinklers. It protects you down to lower degrees of temperature.
Well, as I thought, we only had 30 minutes, so I'm going to keep you for another 30. We're going to say goodbye to our audience now. We're going to come back and we're going to talk about Beckstoffer Vineyards. So thank you, everybody. We'll see you next week.